Hi there, everyone, and welcome to this Led by Love podcast. We're starting, as many people know, a new series of teaching on Sunday mornings called Led by Love. And it's really inspired by the ongoing conversation we're having as a church together about what our leadership looks like and the shape of our leadership team, how we listen to each other, how we listen to God, how we discern what He's doing. So we're hoping to delve deeply into this theme of what it means not to be led by necessity or led by kind of tradition, but what it means to be led by love and the God who is love. So as part of that, we're having these conversations together with others that I'd just love to bounce this stuff around with. And I'm thrilled today to have Rev Hayley Young, who many of us here at Bethel will know. She was in regional ministry here in South Wales, and then didn't abandon us. She was called on to a role that we'll talk about in just a second. I think it was traditional, not traditional, quite the opposite actually, transitional and strategic lead in the Northern Baptist Association. So looking forward to gleaning some of that experience today. And it's great to have Andy Gibbs with us, who again, most people from Bethel will know, member with us, a hospital chaplain here, well, I was going to say in Cardiff, but far beyond it as well. That's 4 days a week. What we're going to dive into this morning is what happens on that fifth day. Some of us here in leadership will know of that because we've benefited from it, especially while I've been seconded to the local association here. But to talk about kind of what he's seen of different leadership styles and teams and structures. So great to have you both here because you both bring a wealth of experience, but also a sort of an overview as well, which I'm hoping will be really, really helpful. So we're going to start with you, Hayley, if that's all right. So transitional and strategic lead.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So basically, my remit, as well as leading the team here in the Northern Baptist Association, has been to transition it into something relevant for the 21st century. So the trustees noted that they needed to do something different, but didn't know what that was. So they called me to come and work that out with them.
And so, how do you? I mean, that's a great opportunity, and I must confess, when I saw the role, I wondered if you'd be interested in it because of just how strategically you think and how creatively you think. So that's a wonderful invitation. But what does that look like? How do you begin a process like that?
Well, you begin a process by listening in every form, and actually you begin it there, but you definitely don't end it there. There's a constant listening, I think, is the underbed. And so we started by very intentionally listening to all voices, but not just conventionally listening. We also listened through our history, through reading minutes of meetings, listening to our previous documentation and publicity, and how we communicated. So that gives you a picture of where you're at and where people want to go. And then there's the tough part, isn't it? So you've then got to take that listening and distill it into something. And so very early on, we did about three months of listening in that intentional stage. And then we held that listening. Okay, because when you listen, you bring out the good, the bad, the indifferent, sometimes the ugly. Yeah. So we held that. And in doing so, we then said, actually, some of this stuff we need to apologize for, even if it was unintentional. And then we moved to a different way of functioning, saying, actually, that kind of old school model of a few leaders that have got all the answers wasn't necessarily where we needed to go, but to go back to our Baptist roots in a modern sense of having some values that permeated who we were. So it became much about who we were and how we facilitate rather than who we were as leaders. So that's where we got to.
I love the thought of listening to your history, because I think often when people think about discerning or vision, it's all about the next, it's all about the new or the current need or solving something. But the thought of not just listening to the current, but really trying to delve into and I love the thought that minutes actually get read. I mean, that's a fantastic
it's a rarity.
It is, yeah. So there was deep listening, and there was acknowledgement, and then what was next?
So next was our apology. So just one of those things about minutes, right? So for me, you see a lot of unconscious bias and conscious bias in church minutes, right? In minutes. So very quickly we were able to see that women's voices were being silenced throughout our history. So that, you know, we love, but actually there's a real seriousness that they're historic documents, right? They tell us who we are. So once we worked out that and who we wanted to be, we then moved to values, and we presented those and shared those with the kind of wider team. And by team, I mean churches, ministers, everyone, because we're all part of this. People really felt they could buy into it because they owned it, because they could hear in the new values, oh, that's my voice coming through, because that's what I shared. So there were some real similarities, and that's where God's beautiful and wonderful unifying spirit works, right? So although people phrased it in different ways, there was like, actually, we were all saying we wanted some of that. We were all saying that. So then we went to move our structural thing. So once we worked out who we were and what we wanted to be, we then said, right, how do we get a structure that fully enables this? And in doing so, what we did is we widened the staff team, and we call them facilitators. So we have facilitators for different things, very intentionally. So you spend ages on words, don't you? We thought, we don't want them to be coordinators. We don't want them to be ministers. Actually, we want them to be facilitators, right? They're not the expert. They are someone that has a particular skill set at bringing others in, right? So how do we associate in this? So from the outset, their role is a collaborative one rather than an authoritarian one. So that's the structure we've got to. And now we're just at the end. Tomorrow, at the point of filming this may go out once we've announced it. We will then call the new team leader who will replace me. And again, that's a shift, isn't it? So lots of people are like, why aren't you staying on? And that was a possibility. But for me, it felt right to say, actually, that's not mine to do. And so actually now we have someone that is being called to the specific needs of the team as a whole and the association as a whole. So yeah, that's the kind of, and their role is to embed, right? Not to enshrine, but to embed the values and flex around and pivot with that.
It sounds amazing, and there's so much in there. It'd be great to dive into. But one thing that particularly struck me was how helpful it was, perhaps, to have an outside pair of eyes, like to have you arrive. Because at the same time, it's quite a difficult thing, isn't it, to arrive as part of a team and say, "Oh, hi, I'm here for change." That's quite a difficult thing, but quite a gift to the team to have a fresh pair of eyes looking through minutes, like, you know, talking, listening. There'd be something really healthy. I'd have thought about that.
Yeah, not everyone's seen it as a gift, right? Let's be honest. Yeah. So and some people have been really rude in that, like absolutely, and they are hopeful that we will spring back to what we were before. Because when you enlarge a team, when you create facilitation, when you create collaboration, that means some people have got to let go of power, right? And not everyone wants to do that, and sometimes you have to have those difficult conversations to say, actually, where is our power? But I think, yes, so the idea was, but what we had to work at, so some people thought I was coming as some outside consultant, right? That I was just going to observe from a distance. But we noticed very early on, well, I kind of always knew, you can't transition from a distance, right? So you can make observations from a distance, but transition, you need to be modeling what you're trying to communicate. So it's all very well pointing out, for example, women's voices are being silenced in this sphere. It's all very well me observing that, but actually the key to transition is modeling, how do I facilitate other voices, women's voices, into this space, and not just mine, right? So actually there was an element of, while we're doing this observing and almost, you know, strategic stuff, we also had the opportunity, by me being the team leader, to embed and model what we were talking about at the same time. So actually it's been done that way before, but actually this this is a different way of doing it.
Mm, mm. Yeah, no, that's really great, and I'd love to dive into, and perhaps we'll come back to this or in another day, the whole idea of leadership as facilitation as well, rather than expertise. I love the thought of that. But there's a sort of a nice segue there to bring Andy in, because one of the things Andy's been doing in the day week that he's offered to us as a church has been being part of leadership conversations and supporting me rather personally. I didn't know if he knew that was part of it, but it's been great. But he's also brought a pair of fresh eyes, and that's been really, really helpful. And occasionally, Andy, you'll just say to me, so why don't we ever, or why does this need to be done that way? And the trouble is, once you are so embedded in a culture, you don't see that, and so that's been really helpful. But Andy, why don't you just share with us how did it come about that you spent a day a week sort of supporting other churches, and yeah, what does that look like? What have you been able to do?
Well, I think it started by God's great humour in guiding me away from church life as ministry and putting me in a hospital or hospitals, rather than basing me full time in a community of faith. And it's been a weird journey for me, because it really birthed out, I suppose, of several factors coming into play at once. So I'd often had conversations with people who said, yeah, we believe you're called to ministry. We believe you're called full time, but you've got something that it can't really be contained or placed in just one place. And working within Baptist structures, that's not something that necessarily beds easily, because you're always in this kind of dating game with the church, this going to them and saying, please love me for me, because I'm here to bless you, and they either do or they don't. So there was that. And then, yeah, just really to follow on from what Hayley said, there was a 27-year management kind of journey that God took me through as well. Again, weirdly, because it's not where I expected to be, coming out of sort of Western environment. But for the last 17 years of my career, I was put in the Environment Agency and Natural Resources Wales that had this massive focus on training. So I was dealing with contentious sites. So lots of facilitation training. How do you engage with people that are completely against anything going anywhere? How do you draw out the voices that are maybe being silenced by the shouters? How do you bring about change? How do you help people to own change so that it actually births something beautiful rather than contentious? So there was all that going on, and then there was this final piece, which was ending up in the NHS, working as a hospital chaplain, which meant that in 4 days a week I was beautifully well paid, so that I didn't need to earn money on the 5th day. So all those three things kind of came together, and as I was struggling with what to do, with my good wife Jan kind of saying, well, maybe you should give a day a week away. Maybe you should use these gifts that God has given you to do something in the local church. And I then got a message from a guy who used to be in our youth group back in the early 90s, who kind of went, hey, I'm pastoring a church. It's near you. We're going through a change of leadership. We're going on, and out of that then came this 1 day a week, which I can just give away. I'm working with a church up near Caerphilly, and a conversation then with the regional ministry team saying, well, yeah, I've got this 1 day. Where would you see it focused? And from that, I've then gone through a few churches now where I've ended up weirdly in my home church, helping my home church to do stuff. But hey, God knows his plans. So that's kind of how I've ended up in this kind of 1 day a week for the association, 4 days a week for the NHS sort of role.
And it's fascinating, isn't it, how God leads us? I think hardly any of us go through an experience thinking this is going to be really useful in some sort of future ministry. So often, discernment in reverse, isn't it? It's hindsight, kind of listening to God, which is fascinating. And so, can you give us just a glimpse of what that's meant in certain places, the kind of things that you've been able to help with and support?
Oh goodness, yeah. It's gone from everything from spending best part of 3 months wading through historic documents, old minutes of meetings, filing cabinets full of sales brochures and training courses and marketing materials, and trying to bring some sense to it, but also trying to go through and say, look, this is foundational for who you are as a community. So these are documents that you really need to think about keeping properly, and so you have access to them. And others are going through saying, well, actually, that you can, you don't need the 15 sales catalogs for, a stationery company that's still in the plastic bags that somebody just put in a filing cabinet. So there's been some of that sorting through to helping people build processes and procedures so they know what they're to do. So that catalogue doesn't stay in the plastic bag. It gets opened if it's needed. If not, somebody contacts the company and says, stop sending me this stuff. And that's gone all the way through then to rewriting of constitutions, implementing things like safeguarding policies and procedures, reviewing how structures function, how the church meeting functions, and bringing that kind of challenge that says you really want to vote on that, but you don't want to vote on that. How did you get to that answer? So really, it does come down to, as Hayley was expressing, it's not an observation role, because if you're standing out of it, you're too detached from it. But it's very much a facilitation role of trying to hear what not only the leadership team but what others are saying, to say how is this community going forwards in faith? How are they going to reach the goals that God is setting them, and then helping them to find ways to achieve those kind of goals. So that's been the kind of broad thrust of it. And that's yes, it's been as broad as emptying garages of rubbish and fixing a drainage problem that had gone on for 15 years at the back of a building, through to sitting down with the leadership team, going through constitutionally who they need to be in order to allow the voices that are meaningful, so everybody's voices, to actually be heard, rather than the select few that will dominate the conversation.
It's kind of fascinating, the link that you both sort of highlighted between sort of proximity and leadership. That the role of the leader that sits in the sort of executive office and just, this is what we need to do. But what was interesting to me, it sort of chimed with Jesus's words, "I am among you as one who serves." But there's a strange irony for me that as Christians, we look to Jesus for an example and inspiration in so many areas, but hardly ever when it comes to leadership. Christian books have got on leadership will take you to Moses or Joshua or Paul sometimes. Hardly ever we think about Jesus as a leader and try to learn from him. And that's quite a core problem, I think, sometimes. So when it comes to leadership, why would you say that getting it right matters? I mean, clearly both of you have spent a lot of time looking at this question in different contexts, different ways. Why is it important to get the leadership team, leadership style, structure? Why does it matter?
Well, we can't forget the context in which we're speaking, right? So we're recording this on the 2nd of May. We know in our news that Mike Pilavachi's had to step back from Sole Survivor for leadership kind of issues and safeguarding issues. And if you've been affected by that, you need to really go and seek out help and guidance. We've got massive blow up with Hillsong in Australia. We've got blow ups in mega churches in America. So getting leadership right is about accountability, right? And it's about bringing honor to the gospel. So, I know I could get quite arrogant. I could be like, I'm really good at this. I can just sit here and do this quite naturally. But that's obviously wrong. But but we're human. So actually getting leadership right, and I guess I want to buff back on the word right. I don't know the correct word to use, but doing leadership well, I guess. In order to do leadership well, we need to surround ourselves with people that hold us accountable. and allow for the difference. Because when we don't do that, that's when we buff seeking Jesus's style of leadership, because ultimately that's sacrificial, right? That's why there's no massive books written on it, because it's about giving up power. It's not about consuming power, and that's why we don't like it. like we want to look at the guy that led people out of slavery, right? That's where we want to go. We don't want to give up the power. So I think for me, that's why these conversations around leadership are so healthy, because we can see recently and in history where it goes wrong. And that's all around, for me, accountability. So creating leadership structures that enable us to be accountable is really key.
Yeah, and it is that aspect, isn't it? That humanly, we like to look to the good looking, the tall, the powerful, the dynamic, that's striding out in front and saying, "Follow me." But we saw that with folk like Saul, and we know how that played out. Everybody looked around, he looks like a king, great, let's follow him. But that's not the leadership you see of Jesus. The leadership of Jesus is amongst, it's mixed in. It's a leading from the middle, not striding out in front and not necessarily at the back kind of herding people, but it's actually a leadership amongst, it's within, it is a conversation. It's almost like a walking meeting where you go from A to B, and rather than having a fixed outcome, you say, well, what would it look like if we were in a different place in a few years' time? And you stroll with each other, and you have different packets of chats, and then at the end of it, you say, well, what does that mean for us? It's a gentle leading where we're all trying to hear God's voice rather than the loudest voice, because like Hayley, I mean, I got, certainly early on in my career, I got told I was arrogant because I was dealing with a technical area and I knew my stuff. I can still, 30 years later, quote from Waste Management Paper 26 to tell you how to run a landfill site, Waste Management Paper 27 on how to extract landfill gas. I can do it. I'm sad enough that I can do it. But that was like hard knowledge. That was simple. That was, you do this or you don't do this. This works, this doesn't. But we're not talking about that kind of thing when we're talking about the Church of God. We're talking about this organic, every member having something to do with the mission of God, every person bringing value. And if we're in that environment, then there are no meaningless voices other than those that seek to exhibit their own power and their own control, because those are the ones that we've got to be really careful of.
I think to land on that, it is very, very powerful. And I think what you're saying about the timing of this conversation is exactly right. That accountability is so key to leadership. And I think it's something that gets sort of, gets mentioned. It's something that gets highlighted. But we don't often sort of create those intentional spaces. I want to invite you to hold me accountable. I mean, those are words that hardly ever get said. And why do you think that is? If it's something that we see in Jesus, if it's something that's meant to be so core to the DNA of what it means to follow Jesus, why is there such a gap, do you think, between that and what we see in leadership today?
I think some of it is that human nature playing out, but also a lot of it is to do with the kind of people that we bring onto leadership teams, because it can get, certainly my experience is very often, oh, there's Phyllis or there's Bob, they've been in the church for 30 years, they're lovely people, let's make them an elder. Or there's somebody, it's never, or that's not true, that's not fair. It's rarely about gifting in that kind of area. It often feels to me, in my experience anyway, a bit like a popularity contest. Who are the people that we like? And then they get a taste of power, even if it's very, very slight. And that then leads to a culture where you end up building something where nobody is willing to say, hang on a second, that doesn't sound right. And there's your recipe for disaster. That's why leadership is so very important. The shape of leadership is so very important. You need the awkward so-and-sos who will say, hang on a minute, are you sure? But we don't often view those as a blessing.
Yeah, definitely.
So one of the big changes we made in the Northern Baptist Association is every year we commit to doing a culture review. So this is part of the ongoing listening. So literally a survey goes out going, how well do you think we're committing to our values? What feedback do you want to give? How's your interaction with the regional team been? What's that been like? And some of that, right? So some people use that as an opportunity to be, right? We just accept that. Other people actually go, I feel like I've been silenced or I've been ignored here. Other people say, actually, this is really good. But what it means that we as a leadership, we as trustees are holding loosely our own power and control and saying, actually, we want to see God move. We want to be better. And not just so that we can grow a mega church. We want to be better because we want to be Christ-like.
Yeah.
We want to model that. Now, the reason we don't do that is because sometimes that means I have to face up to the fact that I'm not perfect, right? That I don't always act in the best way. That actually sometimes I react in a way that maybe doesn't allow someone to flourish. And actually that's hard, isn't it? It's hard to hold a mirror up to your own behavior. It's so much easier to do it for other people, right? So, we're quite happy to do that. Yeah. But actually to say, what is there something in me that is not allowing people to flourish? Because we want to do that, because we want to go from one degree of glory to another and all of those things. But we model it. So do we as ministers, are we training ministers to actually be reflective with their leadership teams as a whole? And so actually, how are we doing? Now, please, I know that if you're a leader that hears this, you go, yeah, but you don't know my leadership team, right? We've all got those people. And therefore, it takes a maturity of actually, you're not just having a pop because you don't like a personality thing. There's something. So Eugene Peterson in Ephesians translates it as being robust in love together. Right? How do we be robust in love? That's my aim. I've not got the answer to it, but I think that's the core. If we as leaders model what it means to be robust in love, then it helps for when we're looking for elections for elders, deacons, and all of those, because we've said this is who we are and this is what we want to be. We want to be accountable. We're submitting to that. And it goes against society, right? It goes against church culture of leader at the front. But I think that's so key, and that's why we don't always do it.
I also think it's really important with the cultural review you're doing, which I think is fabulous, by the way. I think it's a wonderful thing to be doing. That holding loosely, we so often expect immediate results. We so often sit there and go, right, here we go, we've done it now, this will be brilliant. And then you get the feedback and you go, wow, this is a bit painful. I can remember having some 360 feedback about my performance as a manager some years ago. And I found it really quite damaging, because some people, as you say, took it as an opportunity to highlight my imperfections in a way that I didn't find particularly helpful. It wasn't they didn't need to be raised, but I reacted personally, which was a wrong reaction on my part. But this holding it loosely, we kind of forget that there's a building trust with the process, that the first few years that you run it, the first few times that you go down this avenue, lots of people will be standing back and going, hang on, this is new, this is different. It didn't used to be like this. Will they really listen? So there'll be quite a large number of people that will step back a bit and go, well, I'm just going to be a bit cautious because I've been burnt by this kind of thing before. And yet it's exactly the right thing to do, because that iterative, cyclical listening is precisely what we need to do to enable any kind of leadership to function well, because that is asking the questions then, whose voice is dominating and whose voice is being silenced, who's joining us on the journey actually, and who's trying to take us off on a different path. So there's something as well, I think, about that robust love is something about a resilience that we allow Christ to put in us, that says, I'm willing to hear the painful truths and the painful half-truths, because in it there is the opportunity for others to speak truth in a way that enables us to go forward, So it is sacrificial. You know, it's Christ's suffering is that bit we're reflecting there.
Hayley mentioned earlier about maturity, and I think, Andy, what you were talking about there is having the kind of maturity that allows you to be able to sometimes engage with, yes, what you've said, the way that you've said it was really, really painful. That doesn't mean there wasn't any truth in it. Yeah, and to try and have that robustness is going to be essential, I think, for listening. I hadn't really fully, before we started this process, fully realized that we thought we were just talking about leadership structure, but actually that took us right back to what we want to do as a church, who we want to be. And so the whole idea of the culture of the church has been asked, you know, a few times of us, and I've asked it as well as we've gone through this process. And that really is what has led me to the title, sort of being led by love. And we were talking before we got started recording today, just about how strange it is that the word leadership and the word love hardly ever get used in the same sort of sentence, which is a really, really sad thing. So, like, how do you respond to the phrase led by love? What does that mean to you? And, well, yeah, why is that so much harder than just having a really clear sort of strap line or structure?
I think I've got two reactions to it. So my first is, you know, when you think about led by love, it feels a little wishy-washy, doesn't it? Right. So there's an element, like, forgive me, like, that you just think, oh, is it? But what we forget is we see leadership as transactional, right? I make this decision, you do this, or then I do this. And actually the Gospels, Jesus amongst us, teaches us that leadership is relational. We can make the same things about faith. Faith is not transactional, it's relational. So after I've buffed around it feels wishy-washy, you come back to actually it's leadership out of relationship. And not like, don't get me wrong, we know as leaders that phrase is often abused, you know, so I'll befriend you in order to get you to do what I want, right? But true relationship means that actually we are journeying together. And as we talk and chew this over and mull this over, my view may be changed as you are changed in your sharing with me. So there is this vulnerability within it that actually I think is key, but it buffs against everything current church culture tells us leadership is. It comes back to what Andy said, you know, the good looking person going out the front. I think I still am those characteristics, but I just may not be out the front, you know. So I think kind of buffing that, because also people kind of expect it, yeah. So the amount of times I've been told by congregations, well, just lead. We pay you to lead, right? So just lead. And so they see it as maybe you shirking your responsibilities, but what you're trying to do is empower the culture so it's not celebrity or pastor led. And we sometimes think of that in big churches. It happens in small churches as well. Let's not fool ourselves. Everything hones on that one person. So I think that's why leading by love is so important, because it offers a vulnerability, but I think we buff against it because of those reasons that it leads us to vulnerability.
And that's a really important point, that idea of the person at the front on a pedestal in whatever, because I have experienced too many times church ministries built on that kind of personality, where it's all about one person doing it rather than this organism doing it. So as soon as that person leaves or is removed, everything around it falls apart, because there's no resilience within the system. That the community are there going, well, where's our leader gone? What do we now do? And they become like a flock without a shepherd. Whereas we get this beautiful picture of Jesus of when he is working with his disciples, he's leading them, but he's also developing them. He's also growing their hearts. He's growing their faith. He's directing them into his way of doing things, which should now be our way of doing things, which is not, look at me, I'm the best. You know, Jesus gave pretty short shrift to James and John when they kind of said, oh, come on, put us in the positions of power. And he's going, you've got no clue what you're asking for. It's it's this beauty that comes from facilitating of growing others, that means when an individual leaves the community because of being called to other work, or being having to move because of work, or whatever, the mission of God doesn't get derailed in any way, shape, or form, because everybody still owns it. Everybody still says this is what we're passionate about, and everybody still says we can do this, because it's not about an individual, it's about us. And surely that's the most Baptist way of doing anything, isn't it? It's meant to be all about us doing together, not John as my pastor, you doing everything, and I'm just going to sit in the background and go, I like that, but I don't like that. You know, it's a completely different way of being, and it all fangs out of that love. And I don't think it needs friendship either. I can love people I don't like. I can love people who are really awkward and difficult and keep on doing things that to me are so frustrating. But if I love them, I give them space to appropriately engage, so that you look and go, well, what is at the root of this? Because that I think is the other thing, that be leading with love, leading with that desire for the best of all and the best of the individuals. It's about going deeper than the surface. It's not about just going what the surface cause. I was trying to get down to the root cause. What's happening here? Is this an issue of heart, or is this an issue of character, or is this an issue where you're hearing God in a clearer way than I am? So therefore, I now need to submit myself to God's will in a different way and go, okay, I best listen then. And I don't think God puts grit in the oyster with just thinking of getting a bigger ball of grit. There's always a bigger purpose in it. So I always sit there and go, there are definitely pearls of wisdom out there.
And that's got to be part of the culture shift, hasn't it? Because I think so often the need for leadership, the call to leadership, the demand of leadership are about, let's just keep this thing running. Let's just keep, we need, a bigger team for this, or we need more resources for that, or let's solve this sort of next problem, rather than starting the other way around. What is God saying? What's the call of God? What's the gifts of the Holy Spirit in the church? And then how do we, as leaders, facilitate that, rather than try and knock it into a shape that keeps the church thing going, so that when God calls somebody to another place, another role, there isn't a sense of, oh, we're feeling bereft now. The culture is, we can celebrate that because we were blessed because of the call of God, not because of the need or the sort of the, I don't know, what do they call it, a marriage of convenience. But the culture of God is at work, and we just want to support that.
I mean, certainly some of the things that I feel that as a leader I could celebrate the most was when I saw people leave for all the right reasons. Leave so their faith would grow, leave so their gifting could be used more fully. I think I saw more reasons for celebration sometimes when things stopped than when things started, because it was a redirecting towards what God was wanting, rather than just that continuing, that iterative, I'm just going to do this because we've always done it and we've stopped it, we can start it again, but we're just going to call it a different name, but it's the same thing. It's so freeing, because you end up in a position where you are no longer bound by what has happened. You're informed by it, you're fed by it, but it's how is God at work in doing these things that are not simply there to do those things, but to build us up ready for the next things that will take us in a different direction. So there's such joy when people achieve their potential in God, and maybe not with us, maybe in a different place.
I think that's it, and I think it's so key, isn't it? That release. I remember, when I was a pastor in church, I used to love it when actually I was doing nothing on a Sunday, because actually you're raising people up, and for me that's always a signal. My role is to equip the saints. So actually, when you're not needed, you work yourself out of your role, and then you go, actually, God's calling me on somewhere else. I think one of the keys though in leading in love means it's not about you, right?
Yeah.
So that's the key. So we've talked a lot about us and the kind of internal things of church, but actually if a church is being led by love, they're always going to be thinking of the other. They're always going to be putting other people's needs. You know, we've got that wonderful description of love isn't it? You know, in Corinthians, it's patient, it's kind, does not envy, does not boast. So actually, if we're leading with that as the center, it no longer becomes about us and maintaining a structure that we really love and has served us well. It becomes about actually how does this serve the wider community? How does this serve the others? And I think that's also the other key, isn't it? If you're leading by love, it's not all about you.
I can remember a really a dearly departed saint. She must have been in her 80s when I was doing youth work in Rubina, and they'd kind of transitioned the services to include drums and guitars as well as cellos and violins. I can remember her sidling up to me at the end of a service. I think it was a youth service that we'd done, where we caused controversy by taking the collection in hard hats rather than collection plates. You know, dreadful. We're doing the story of Nehemiah and building, and it was almost heresy. But this beautiful old lady came up to me and said, "Andy, I hate the drums. I think they're an abomination. But if they bring people into this church, then God bless them and use them." And that for me was just such a beautiful example of what you're just saying, Hayley, of somebody going, this is not about my likes and preferences. This is nothing to do with what I want. It is absolutely to do with what God wants and what will grow his kingdom.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, that seems like a great place to just draw it to a close. But thank you so much both for your time. I know, Andy, you're on call today, which is why you're in part uniform. So thanks for putting this in. And Hayley, you're about to move. So nice, quiet, relaxed time for you. So thank you so much, guys. It's been really good to talk.
Oh, thank you.